there could be interesting developments coming up with how President Biden is handling the relationship with Israel. Now, Joe Biden is going to have a visit to Israel soon, and he visits both Israel and the Palestinian Authority. Now, during the visit, Biden will be hosted by Abbas in Bethlehem, where the chairman hosted former President Donald Trump during his term in office. And then Biden is to visit Eastern Jerusalem for the first time. And there, perhaps at the Makassad Hospital, is expected to announce the renewal of United States financial aid to Eastern Jerusalem's hospital network, amounting to tens of millions of dollars. But the Biden administration is concerned about the 87-year-old Abbas's state of health and fears that his exit from the political stage will undermine the PA's hold on the West Bank and spark a sort of succession battle, and might well boost the status of Hamas, who's responsible for quite a lot of violence in the area. So US policymakers, it says, fear that even before Biden's visits, Israel, that Abbas will take measures to further complicate the political situation. Now, this is interesting in that there was a reference there in that brief report to ex-President Trump's visit to Israel, to Jerusalem. Now, he was a strong supporter of the Israeli government as being Western-style democracy, a friend of America. And as a sign of this, he moved the US embassy in Israel into Jerusalem for Tel Aviv, which was something that had been promised by successive candidates to be president. But he was the only one to follow through on it. But now we have Joe Biden, it's seemingly holding out olive branches to Palestine, who are in conflict with the Israel government over territory rights. So what do you make of this, Beryl? Is this going to be the disaster that's feared?
It could be. Abbas are a powerful Palestinian movement.
We're talking about Hamas there, Abbas being the leader of the Palestinian Authority. And
behind a lot of difficult situations in Israel, they seem to have a terrorist arm. And bad things happen with that terrorist arm. So I feel a bit afraid for Joe Biden.
Abbas, if he goes, it's going to cause instability in the area because he's getting on a bit. He's older even than President Biden. Could be real issues there. Is this the right approach, or do you think that the approach taken by President Trump is better? Just to outline what was done and what is being done. What was done is President Trump went outside of the region, his authority did. So instead of just dealing with Israel and the Palestinian Authority, he went to the surrounding Arab nations and got them to sign up to a peace agreement with Israel and in pressure on Palestine, because then you had a lot of support from the Arab countries around who wanted peace in the region.
Yes.
Now, not all of them, not Iran, for example, but all the others. So you
like
saw
the United Arab Republics,
and there was support from Saudi Arabia, and you had all that in place under President Trump. And this is now a move back to the old way of doing things, of forgetting the surrounding nations and just worrying and niggling at the direct relationship between Israel and Palestine. And in getting involved there, is Biden actually stirring up trouble?
I suspect he might be, because it seems to me anyway that Israel would like to be the sole arbiter of what happens in Israel. They don't want a two-state situation where the Palestinian Authority and Israel would share the governance of Israel.
Now, what is your view theologically on this, Beryl? I have some views on this as well. Israel, back in the Bible, in our Old Testament, had all that region under its control, or at least at the height of its powers under David and Solomon. So what are we to make of this? Is, in fact, the very existence of a Palestinian Authority illegitimate? Because it's the promised land which should belong to Israel. That's one view.
That would be my view. It is somewhat affected by the fact that some people believe that the land of Israel does not belong to its current inhabitants, because so many of them, once upon a time, lived in America. And a lot of Israel has had immigrants from other countries. And that basis has caused Israel to say, well, this is our country. The Palestinians have no business being here. The surrounding countries ought to take in the Palestinians.
Oh, I see, yes.
Because there's plenty of room for them there. Israel is only a small country, and its basis is as it is in the Old Testament.
The claim that this is the promised land and that it is their land is not based on ethnicity, is it? It's based on religious affiliation. If you're Jewish, you can be there. You're part of Israel.
Also based on the fact that so many Jewish people who have a religious affiliation have had to flee Israel in the past because of the pogroms against them.
So when this was set up, a secular state of Israel, that was the start of a lot of issues in the Middle East. And I know other areas were suggested as a part of, I believe it was Ethiopia, but another part of the African continent was suggested as a place for these homeless Jews to be housed. But in fact, the historic land of Israel was chosen. Now, there's some interesting points, because my belief is that the prophecies, the promises of God about the promised land were fulfilled, and they're described in detail in the Old Testament. And we're not looking to a future return of the nation of Israel, but rather that what was true for the land of Israel is now true for the whole world. When Jesus came as the perfect Jew, if you like, the perfect Israeli, because he was God in human form as an Israeli, he fulfilled finally those promises and expanded the promises of God for the land, the promised land, to be the whole world, in fact the whole universe, because all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved, as it says in Paul's letters to the Romans. So it's now not people who claim allegiance to this particular nation who are the chosen people of God, but the people who basically trust in Jesus. Yes, that comes from the promises to Israel, but it's now expanded to include anyone who believes, and doesn't involve a promise of that land. It's a promise of God ruling over the entire world. It's a different view. Okay. I'm just saying I have a different view. So I don't see that as an argument. But what do you think of this, Norman?
Can I take you back to Hamas and Abbas? Our correspondent in Jerusalem, well, no, actually, our correspondent in Bethlehem.
Okay, yes.
Claim has a friend in Bethlehem who regularly supplies us with interviews around the Christian scene and lives just a short distance down the road from the Church of the Nativity. He persistently says that in all of his talking around Bethlehem and all of his contacts, there is a strong dislike of Hamas. That 95% of people within Bethlehem want to live in friendship with Israel, easy flow of help to and fro between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, medical, educational, commerce, and that it's only 5%, as Paul puts it, troublemakers who are causing all of this difficulty. Yes. And that there's no mechanism of voting them out of office because they have a strong power base, that they are actually corrupt in terms of economic. A lot of economic aid goes to favoured people, and that the best thing that could happen for the people of Bethlehem, the Arab people of Bethlehem, which actually include a large number of Christians, even though that they are Arabs, and also the people of Ramallah, is that there should be a single state solution and that Hamas should be pushed to the sideline and just ignored as a disruptive political party. And that's the view of somebody living on the ground in the real situation. Yeah. I think it's worth listening to, because we can sit for ages in a cosy little room pontificating on all of our theories. But that's his observation. And through all of the terrors that they're going through at the moment with regards to COVID and economic situations, and tourism has collapsed, and it's a really, really sad state. And they're relying upon aid sent in, financial aid from England. It is a real sad, sad situation for the actual Palestinian people in Bethlehem. I think that's worth registering.
Yes, absolutely. And it's certainly no comment on who is right in terms of Hamas and Israel to say that I believe that the theological basis for Israel's right to stay there has no merit at all. Because what you have is a democratic state who are in existence. It's a fait accompli. And what you have is a terrorist organisation trying to force the issue that they get a bit of land. So that's no comment on the rights and wrongs of the current situation. But what it does is mean that you have to consider actually how Israel is set up, how it's behaving, as to whether you decide that it has the right to the land. But the question that we're looking at the start is Biden going to mess things up? And I do think that the approach of going in there and focusing on this relationship between Abbas and then Hamas, as well as the Palestinian Authority, and then we have their direct relationship with Israel, is focusing in too much, putting America in as the world's policeman again, and it doesn't have a good record on that. So it seems to me, sadly, that the most likely outcome is that he'll make things worse. I'm sorry to say. So if we have a message from Beryl and Pete, should we say to Biden, just stay out of it, would you?
Yes, I think so. I think I would agree with that.
Dear, oh dear, yes. He's not had a good record recently in promoting world peace, let's put it that way.
No. Mind you, I noticed that Mahmoud Abbas is 87.
87, yes.
How old is Biden?
Biden is, I think, 79.
Oh, well.
Yes,
so
a spring chicken.
Common, then.
Well, they can compare ailments, and maybe Abbas has fallen off his bike recently. Who knows? Who knows what might have happened to him? These things happen when you get older.